Thank you for joining today's Public Housing Repositioning Strategies for Small Public Housing Agencies webinar series. Together with presenter Mike Andrews, Principal of Structured Development, and myself, Christina Pam Smith, are your hosts for today. We also have subject matter experts from HUD on the line to answer your questions during the Q&A at the end of the session. Before Mike begins, I have a few housekeeping items. We have allotted approximately 2.5 hours for Mike to speak on the designated topic, and we'll leave 30 minutes at the end for a question and answer session with our subject matter experts. In that regard, if you have questions for the presenter throughout the presentation, feel free to ask questions in 2 ways. In the right-hand navigation panel, you'll see a hand-shaped icon. If you'd like to verbally share your question, select the hand icon and I'll unmute your line in order of questions received. Or if you'd like to send us your question, feel free to type your question in the chat box in the lower right-hand navigation panel. I'll read your question aloud in the order received. If we're unable to address all questions, we will send an email reply after the webinar. All webinar participants are muted upon entry. If you'd like to notify our team of any technical difficulties, please send us a message in the chat box. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be available on HUD Exchange shortly following the webinar. Immediately following the webinar, you will receive an invitation to complete a survey in today's webinar. We welcome you to complete the short survey and share any ideas you may have for future webinars. I'll now hand it over to Mike to begin the presentation.
Thanks, Christina. Good morning or afternoon, everyone, depending upon where you're at. Thank you for joining the 4th in the series of Public Housing Repositioning Strategies webinars. Again, my name is Mike Andrews, and glad to be able to be with you again today. So today we're going to do 2 things generally. We're going to talk about the public housing closeout process as a kind of a capstone to some of the repositioning tools that we had talked about before. And then we're going to focus on some case studies and try to get back to some real-life examples. So I'll touch on that, how we're going to do that in just a minute. Before I get into it a little bit further, I'd like to spend a little bit of time, this being the last session, to acknowledge and thank everyone who spent time on the presentation materials that we've been using. There's been a lot of folks from HUD who have participated in adding to and revising and massaging these slides to make sure that they're the very best information that we can make available to assist you in your thinking. So thank you to everyone from HUD who has worked in that regard. And then also thank you to my colleagues with Enterprise who've been working to deliver this training. So a lot has gone into this, a lot behind the scenes, and I want to just acknowledge those folks who have spent a lot of time preparing these materials. So let's get into it. So again, the overall purpose of this webinar is to help you think about the best ways to reposition your public housing portfolio. We talked in the first session about this idea of understanding your current state and imagining your desired future state, developing a deeper understanding of the specifics around your current state, understanding matters related to the real estate, your funding flow, local politics, local housing needs, everything that goes into understanding your current state, and then applying the best tool available to you to make the transition from your current state to your future state. We talked about how RAD and Section 18 and streamlined voluntary conversion, or in some cases combinations of those, can be used to reposition your portfolio. So a little bit about the ground rules again for today. Thank you for having participated in all of the sessions. We appreciate that. To the extent to which you can, please avoid distractions, silence your phone, and ask plenty of questions. Again, this is our last session. The materials are available and will continue to be available online. So if you want to revisit them, or if you want to share them with colleagues, that option will be available to you. And we encourage you to do that as you think necessary. We're going to start off with a couple of quick knowledge checks just as a refresher. So the first one is a question we've seen before. What are some of the reasons public housing authorities may choose to reposition? And again, stabilizing your revenue, so shifting from traditional public housing to the Section 8 platform will provide you with more certainty and stability in that revenue flow, provides you access to debt and equity, so you're able to leverage other capital to complete needed improvements in your public housing buildings, and it can reduce your administrative burden. Next question, to whom may a housing authority dispose public housing property? Talked about this one a little bit Tuesday, and it's very relevant for today's conversation as well about closeout. So it must be a separate legal entity, and a separate legal entity may be the housing authority, may be controlled by the housing authority. It may be a limited partnership or a nonprofit, which the housing authority has active control over. So the housing authority can maintain local control, local governance. It just needs to be a legally different entity than the housing authority. True or false? RAD is the only repositioning tool that allows the housing authority to carry over existing public housing funds and use them towards replacement reserve to support a future Section 8 property following conversion. True or false? RAD is the only tool that allows you to carry forward those traditional public housing resources into a future Section 8 transaction. That is true. That's something important to keep in mind and, as we think about closeout today. So today we're gonna talk about what closeout means. We're going to talk about what housing authorities can do with their leftover public housing capacity, their available Faircloth amounts or their resources. We're talking about different options that exist, different paths that exist to formally execute a closeout of your Section 9 program. What I'd also like to do today is when we finish closeout, we're going to get into a couple of preset case study examples as a way to walk through the decision-making matrix that we spent some time with on Tuesday, so we can try to make those concepts real. I have queued up some of the information that we've been looking at for Oxnard. We can do that again. And what I'd like to do is invite someone, maybe even a couple of folks from a housing authority who would like to volunteer themselves to, we can unmute your line and we can look at your specific information. My goal in doing this is to help everyone understand how you would sit down at your own computer in your own office, thinking about your own portfolio, and go through the matrices that the concepts within the matrices that we talked about on Tuesday, look at that information and go through the thought process. So in real time, show you where you get that information, how you compare it, how you work with the information available, and what decisions that seems to be leading you to about best options for your portfolio. I'll ask a couple of housing authorities if they want to volunteer themselves. We'll unmute your line and we'll have a conversation, and I'll share my screen and we'll show you guys in real time just how that works. So let's get started. What does closeout mean? So closeout means that you're turning off your Section 9 engagement with HUD. It means that you no longer have a public housing program, but it does not mean that the entity that had been receiving public housing resources ceases to exist. We touched on this a little bit earlier. First and foremost, housing authorities are creatures of the state in which they exist. You might be a standalone entity governed by a board that has your own organizing documents and your own budgets. You might be embedded in a city or a county, but you are an entity unto yourself first, who then secondly receives Section 9 resources from HUD. By stopping the flow of Section 9 resources, you continue to exist. You may have other contracts and other commitments, other obligations, You certainly have other powers and rights within your state that can still be used to deliver an affordable housing agenda in your community. So I think it's useful to think about that going forward view as well, because you likely still have a lot of affordable housing needs in your community. Housing authorities have lots of abilities, and think about how you can continue to fit into your affordable housing delivery system is a useful part of the strategy and that we talked about on session 1, and the closeout that we'll talk about here on session 4. So in certain instances, a closeout is required by HUD. If you utilize the Section 18 50 or less option, the Section 22 streamlined voluntary conversion, which is at 250 or less, the RAD streamline process for 50 or less, or if you use RAD and you no longer have any fair cloth units. So for folks that might not be familiar with the term, the fair cloth number or fair cloth units is the term used to define the maximum number of public housing units which your housing authority is entitled to. That information exists. You can, if you Google HUD fair cloth, you'll actually find a list of all the housing authorities out there, and you'll see what your fair cloth number is. In some instances, you may find that the actual number of units that you have in your PIC right now or on your ACC right now is less than your fair cloth number. That's something to be aware of as you're going into closeout. When should a housing authority begin thinking about closeout? I think if you intend to reposition some or all of your portfolio, and you're starting to think about the right tool, I think that is also a time to keep in mind thinking about closeout. So now is the time to start thinking about it. You want to give some thought to where your assets may go. You want to give some thought to a variety of other considerations around staffing, cash accounts. We'll touch on pensions in a little bit. But closeout should definitely be part of the strategy conversation, which you begin thinking about at the very front end and as you imagine what your desired future state is. So the assets which HUD is most interested in for purposes of a closeout are your public housing operating reserves, any remaining proceeds, so that would be funds payable to the housing authority as a result of a previous disposition of public housing, any remaining public housing land. So you, for a variety of circumstances, housing authorities could have a piece of land which has no building on it, which might still have a declaration of trust recorded against it. So take stock of your inventory of real estate assets, even if it's not an apartment building. Any future public housing funding, so that could be in the form of DDTF, which is your demolition and disposition transition fees, or your ARF, which is your asset repositioning fees. And then your fair cloth authority. So again, the fair cloth being the maximum number of public housing units that you are allowed to have by right, by agreement with HUD. If you have more fair cloth authority than you have current units, then you've got some excess bandwidth that you need to think about. You need to think about your liabilities as well. So what is owed by the housing authority? So are there any obligations owed to any creditor? Had you completed a CFFP, a capital fund financing program? So you borrowed against your stream of cap grant. Do you have an EPC, an energy performance contract, where you also borrowed against future funding from HUD in order to complete some or install some measures that would make your buildings more efficient? Think about staffing obligations. So, and this one can take on all sorts of different forms. And in some cases, housing authorities have elected to shift staff to the new entity that was created, and maybe the new entity that was created to be the recipient of disposed of assets. In those instances, those staff are technically no longer a public employee. There's lots of considerations there. Pensions are mentioned a couple of times throughout this presentation. Definitely something for the housing authorities to think about and it's definitely a state-by-state situation. So if you work for a housing authority right now, you're likely a public employee. It's quite likely that you have some sort of public employee retirement benefit that you're paying into or someone's paying into on your behalf. So if you are going to shift the staff's employment to a different entity, you need to think about what that might need. It might be that the staff stays with the housing authority as a entity that continues to exist, and that's fine too. Those housing authorities might continue to exist and because they're running their Section 8 program. So the housing authority staff can stay with the housing authority. The housing authority remains a going concern, but the real estate is now owned by somebody else. There's a variety of different things to consider here as you're thinking about where will those assets go and where do you, here the slide's called liabilities, but maybe more generally just obligations that the housing authority has. So what are eligible expenditures of Section 9 public housing funds after a public housing closeout? So there's a few listed here. So any administrative costs associated with the closeout. So staffing, operations, legal cost, audits, any costs related to the sale of assets and board costs. So any administrative cost that you have to incur as an element of the closeout is eligible. Any outstanding public housing claims, liabilities, litigation, so anything that any cost or obligation that was created during your Section 9, your public housing program, or because of your Section 9 or public housing program is eligible. Staff transition, if that's something that you choose to make part of your overall shifts, overall repositioning. Record keeping for 5 years following the date the last public housing unit was removed. So any ongoing record keeping. And maintenance of any remaining public housing property prior to that final removal of the DOT. And then if you are a moving to work entity, moving to work organization, your single fund flexibility would afford you some eligible uses that would be defined by your moving to work agreement. So those are very situational and only if you're a moving to work organization. So how does a PHA notify HUD of its intent to close out? So I suggest that there's two ways to do that. One is by a form. So by 5837, and so that's the formal way. I would strongly encourage you as you're thinking about your repositioning, as you're working with your local field office, to make this part of that conversation. Let your field office know that you're heading in this direction, that you're organizing yourselves to reposition your portfolio and you intend to close out, so that your housing authority or your public housing HUD field staff can help you think through estimations of funding flows, timing. There's going to be lots of details that come up. So do give them heads up early that you're intending to do this so they can work with you along the way. There are three specific tracks or three specific options that exist for closeout. Referred to as the ACC closeout, the public housing transfer, or the public housing consolidation. Each of them are defined by a notice, and we'll spend a little bit of time talking about some of the distinctive characteristics of each of them. Under a public housing closeout, this is where the housing authority is working to end its public housing existence and just tying everything off. So some of the requirements there are that the housing authority will complete a final audit and reconciliation of all funds. The housing authority will complete an inventory of any public housing assets or any assets that are not real estate, so any personal property that's over $5,000. When we've talked about this in trainings before, you guys can imagine certain things that you might own, any machinery, equipment that is over $5,000 that's not a real estate asset, that you may have purchased with your public housing resources in service of operating your public housing properties. You keep a list, make a list of those, keep an inventory of those, and that becomes part of what is submitted to HUD. In this track, in this closeout option, everything will come to a halt, and you kind of tie everything off. So you're working just with yourself and with your HUD field office. So you're not collaborating with any other housing authority. Whatever, ideally under this path, you will find a way to use all available resources in an eligible way, so you don't lose anything. So it requires that you be very planful, so that you think about the use of any cash accounts that currently exist, any reserves, any future funding flow that is available to you, so that you can make use of all of those dollars in service of your portfolio, which you have now disposed of through one of the channels that we've talked about. So under this option, you're not working with anyone else. You're just using those resources unto yourself. Under the public housing program transfer, it's a little bit different. So it also involves, this involves a complete closeout, either through using your available resources on your own portfolio or transferring some amount of the remaining public housing assets to a receiving public housing authority. Under this scenario, the public housing authority is both the existing is an existing public housing authority, obviously, and the receiving housing authority currently exists. So it's not a new housing authority, it's not a new entity, it's an existing public housing authority. So under this scenario, the idea is that you have done the likely idea is that you have done your best to use available resources in service of your own portfolio, but for whatever the circumstances, it might be that there's going to be some resources that are currently available to you that you can't put to use. So rather than those just evaporating or going back to Treasury, and I think HUD shares this goal of not wanting to send those resources back to Treasury, but wanting to put them to use in service of low-income people in your community, you can transfer them to a housing authority who agrees to work with you. So you can transfer cash resources, you could transfer any of your personal property, you could transfer remaining fair cloth amounts, you could transfer the future expected DDTF or ARF resources that are coming to you. So as you can imagine or might imagine, there's a lot of planning here to think about how best to use them first in service of your own portfolio, and then to the extent to which that you can't do that, identifying a housing authority that might be a good partner, and then transfer those to the new partner. So a couple of, it's labeled here costs, but I think just considerations as well. The prior PHA governance, so the sending housing authority, will have no control over the resources transferred to the receiving housing authority. It requires collaboration with the receiving housing authority. And it requires, I think, both sides to really understand what is it that's being sent and received. So I think a careful consideration by both the sending and receiving housing authority is important, so they both know what is being taken on and what is being sent. I think from HUD's perspective, there's a formal process here and there's a notice. I think beyond or on top of HUD's process, there's room for a conversation between the two housing authorities to think about what other relationship might there be. So while the sending housing authority is sending public housing assets and the receiving housing authority is agreeing to that, it might be that there's something else that is being agreed to as well. So I think I would encourage housing authorities to think about what that partnership might look like. The third option here is the public housing program consolidation. So here, this is the same notice as the prior option that we talked about. Here, a key consideration is that the public housing program assets, liabilities are being sent to a newly created housing authority. So unlike the prior, where it was an existing, here it's a new entity. Now what is, I think, the practical application of this, and it's shown here in the middle box. In some states, there's state housing finance agencies have organized themselves to be this repository of these types of resources so as not to lose these resources in the state. So it's, I don't think that HUD is in the business of creating new public housing authorities for sake of receiving new Section 9 funding flow, but to the extent to which you can find an entity that would meet the terms of this agreement, it is often, or I think the most common thought here is that it would be a state housing finance agency where they serve as a repository for your state or any housing authority that is looking to close out. And rather than having a single entity that you transfer to, it's consolidated in this new entity. Some of the same considerations apply. The sending housing authority would have no formal governance over the receiving housing authority's use of funds, but maybe there could be some agreements made. It does require close collaboration, and it's important for both sides to really understand what is being sent and received. Let me stop there before we get into the next knowledge check and see if there's any questions or any questions.
We're not seeing anything right now.
I didn't see anything either. Okay, let's keep going with the knowledge check. So true or false, a housing authority that wants to close their public housing program must return any unused program funds to HUD. If you want to close out, your only option is to return unused resources to HUD. Answer to that is false. You have options. You have these 3 closeout options, and I think it's fair to say HUD staff would encourage you to use those options so as not to have HUD return those funds to Treasury, but put them to good use in your community. A couple of key takeaways. So again, this does not mean that the legal entity that had been the recipient of the Section 9 resources goes away. It just means that you no longer have a contract with HUD to receive and follow the rules related to public housing. It just means that that's going to stop, but you still exist as an organization. Plan for your remaining public housing funds. And again, start that planning early. We've talked throughout the last couple of webinars about how sequencing is important and how you might want to intentionally stage your A property to be a 50 or less or a RAD 50 or less for the last conversion so that you can benefit from that Section 18 type of disposition or reposition in a way that allows you to maximize available new operating subsidy. And then by doing that, you will trigger mandatory closeout, even if you have fair cloth. So keep all that in mind and as you're thinking about how these things line up. And then think about early who you might transfer to, whether it's another neighboring housing authority, maybe it's a housing authority. If you're not a housing choice voucher administrator, maybe you want to talk to another housing authority who is a housing choice voucher administrator, who has public housing, who might want to receive your fair cloth or some of your remaining DDTF or ARF that you can't find a way to put to use. And in return, they'll provide services to you in support of your Section 8 program or maybe other services that they provide if it happens to be some sort of family self-sufficiency like programs or what have you. So there's ways in which you can partner with other housing authorities in this closeout conversation to have some mutual benefits. A couple of more key takeaways. So housing authorities must formally announce their plan to HUD through Form 5837. So that's the technical way that it happens. There's a form for all these technical things. And please start the conversation early. and involve your field office in those conversations so they can help you with the planning, and so they know it's coming. They can make it part of their own planning and advise you so that you can make some of the best decisions possible. Important resources. We talked about the notices that are available. Those can be found at the repositioning websites or at the HUD-RAD website. And in addition to the notices related to Closeout, there's all of the information that we talked about is available on many of these sites. So again, go to those sites, bookmark those sites, and use them as a going forward resource. Those are the slides related to Closeout. So let me stop there and see if there's any Closeout questions. Is that a hand that went up? It looks like we've got a question from Michael O'Neill.
I'm reading you, Michael.
Michael, are you there? Michael O'Neill, are you there? Maybe that was an inadvertent hand raise. If that wasn't inadvertent, you're having trouble with your audio, Michael, if you go ahead and just maybe type in a question, and we'll address it that way. So, on. Okay, so the next couple of slides will provide some hypothetical examples of situations that will discuss you know, what conversion could look like. We'll go through 3 of those, and then after that, I would like to try this idea of taking on a couple of real-life examples and seeing if we can work in real time with the files available on the HUD website and HUD websites, and illustrate once more for you guys how to do this work. So our first case study is the suspicious-sounding Burnsville Housing Authority. They have an inventory of 2,000 units. Of those 2,000 units, 200 are scattered sites, and 100 are in an elderly high-rise building with significant capital needs. So the question is, what are their options for repositioning inventory of the Burnsville Housing Authority? If you think back to the matrix, some of the first questions that you'd ask yourself are, do you want folks to voucher out, or do you want to preserve your buildings? Let's assume that folks at the leadership of the Burnsville Housing Authority want to preserve their buildings because they think that inventory is important to serving low-income people, but they want to stabilize their revenue. Maybe they got some capital needs, at least in this one building that they do. They want to try to achieve some efficiencies with their operations. So they want to keep the portfolio, continue to serve low-income people, and make some necessary improvements. So they could do that in a couple of ways. They can take advantage of the scattered site, provided that their scattered site portfolio meets the definition of scattered sites under Section 18. Again, that definition is that the parcels of land are non-contiguous, and upon those non-contiguous parcels, there is a building with 4 or fewer units in it. If they meet that definition, they should consider moving forward with a Section 18 50 or less disposition application. A little asterisk on that one. Let's presume here that their fair market rents are greater than their RAD rents. In most instances, that is the case. So let's assume that's the case in Burnsville as well. But you always want to check that to make sure that your FMR rents are greater than RAD. Then they would look at this elderly high-rise building. So this is a pretty common building typology. So it's a building of maybe 7 stories or more. It's often a steel or concrete building with one or multiple building cores with an elevator that serves elderly and disabled. That's a pretty common building typology in the public housing portfolio program nationally. In a lot of instances, those buildings have a lot of repairs that are needed. And again, these are things that are broken, not just old. These are things that need to be fixed because they've worn out, not things that either are dated. There's a gentleman at the SAC who likes to talk about the vintage 70s kitchen appliances and countertops that you might not be fond of the appearance and the color, but if they still function, they're not obsolete. So there has to be things that are broken that you can quantify a cost for. If you can prove that your building is obsolete, quote unquote, in the context of the HUD rules, so you've compared your cost to rehab against your total development cost for that building. And again, in a second here, we'll go back to that file and remind you where to get it and how to do this calculation. Then if you can prove that, then obsolescence is the best course of action. So you'd submit your Section 18 obsolescence application, and then your tenant protection voucher application upon receiving your dispo approval letter. And then you go through all the steps to project base those tenant protection vouchers back in this building, complete the necessary rehab of the building. So take time to do all the careful planning for an occupied rehab. And then what will be left will be a building which you control. It was disposed to a different entity. It has a HAP contract on it for all of the units, and you've completed the necessary rehab. So now I've got stabilized occupants, I've got stabilized revenue because I have a HAP contract that's tied to my FMRs and will increase based upon a reliable factor. I've spent a lot of money to fix the things that were broken in the building, and I'm on my way to not having public housing anymore. I'm going to close out once I complete this last repositioning transaction. So now that I've removed my scattered sites of 100, was it 100 or 200? I had 200 scattered sites, 100 in this elderly building, so I got 1,700 units left. So through the remainder, for the remainder of my portfolio, I will execute a variety of RAD transactions. So I'll take a look at what's left in my portfolio, what's left either in a single amp or across amps, and I will execute specific RAD transactions, going through all the RAD steps. So I'll engage with a capital needs assessment provider. Well, I'll submit my RAD application. I'll get my CHAP. I'll then engage with a capital needs assessment provider. I'll look at what my needs in those buildings might be, and then I'll think about the best way to package individual RAD transactions that will result in a conversion of those remaining 1,700 units. Once I've done that, and so let's say that I had a little bit of fair cloth left, so I don't have to close out because my last transaction was RAD and I had fair cloth left. So now I'm in a position where I can continue to receive or I can account for how I will use my DDTF and my ARF money. My RAD transaction was the only eligible use of future public housing funding for a property on the Section 8 platform. So I've got some good options there. And then I can ultimately work towards a closeout. That's one scenario. Next scenario is case study B, even more suspicious sounding Esterline Town Housing Authority. They have an inventory of 90 units. They want to maintain the same hard units in their community, so preservation is important to them, so they don't want to lose the units. What public housing repositioning options should they consider? So a couple of things to consider here for them. It could be the RAD closeout blend. So the Housing Authority could apply for RAD for all of the 90 units, and then seek to use 50 of those units under the Section 18 50 or less option. And then the balance of those units would transition under RAD. So they can blend their RAD and their Section 18. In this instance, we'd be assuming that their fair market rents are much greater than their RAD rents. So by doing this, they're able to maximize their available revenue by maximizing the access to tenant protection vouchers, which would have a rent indexed to FMR, and then have RAD rents for the balance. In this case, let's assume that the Housing Authority doesn't have a housing choice voucher program. So they will need to have found a partner housing authority who would work with them to be their housing choice voucher administrator. So this scenario would see them entering into a future project-based voucher agreement, both for the RAD and the PBV units that would be with the tenant protection vouchers, which have been awarded, and then the owner of that building moving forward, which is a different entity now than the Housing Authority since it's been disposed of, would sign the HAP agreement with the partner Housing Authority. If they can't find a partner Housing Authority, they'd be limited to the RAD PBRA option. And 100% of their units would convert under RAD. You can see how finding a partner to agree to administer a PBV contract is pretty important to opening up some of the, at least this option for the Esterline Housing Authority. And then lastly is the even more suspect Zybus County Housing Authority. They have an inventory of 240 public housing units. They do have a housing choice voucher program with 1,000 units in it. They want to maintain the same hard units in their community. What options do they have? So first thing they should think about is how their RAD rents compare to what would be their PBV rents. They can do that by checking the FMRs. If the RAD rents are less, then you want to keep looking at how you might qualify for a Section 18 or Section 22 conversion, because they're at 240 units, which is less than the threshold or the maximum allowable under the SBC. So they could look first at doing a Section 18. It might be that they have some scattered sites. It might be that they have some units that would qualify for the 50 or under. So they should utilize Section 18 first. They could then consider using streamlined voluntary conversion if they don't meet the 50 or less. Here it's important to keep in mind the requirements on mandatory closeout. So if they choose to use streamlined voluntary conversion and they have scattered sites, they might want to use the scattered site Section 18 option first in order to project-base those vouchers in those units, because again, they want to maintain those hard units, and then look to streamline voluntary conversion as an option for a smaller number, because streamlined voluntary conversion comes with those requirements that give the tenants rights to make decisions about how that voucher is going to be used. So if the Zybus Housing Authority wants to preserve those units, the decisions residents make are pretty important on the future deployment of those vouchers. So you can see how these different scenarios conjure up or touch on the different rules related to each of the different tracks, and how, depending upon what your option is, you want to think about which ones fit, which ones don't fit, and which ones kind of fit if certain things happen. And so you need to spend a little bit more time thinking about what that looks like. Well, that's the last of the preset scenarios. And what I'd like to do is pause and see if there's any questions generally about Closeout again. And then we could go into a conversation about some specifics using some real-life examples.
So we have Michael's question he was able to type in.
Oh,
it's how does a PHA maintain its public pension participation using these repositioning options? How would you structure?
So that's a big question. So knowing more about your situation would be important to know exactly how to advise you. But I think first thing I would ask if I was in your situation or if I was at a housing authority in your shoes is know whether or not your housing authority is going to continue to have a Section 8 program and continue to have employees. So are you going to, as the housing authority, continue to employ your staff, or would they shift to a different entity? If you're continuing to employ staff, then presumably you'll still have all of the requirements of the public employee retirement system in your state. If you are going to make some decisions to move staff or restructure staff, then your closeout, your public housing funds can be used to assist you with that endeavor. And whether or not going forward your employees have access to the retirement system is something that I'd encourage you to consider or look deep into your state requirements. Each state's different. I've spent a little bit of time looking at my home state and how this plays out, and I know enough to know that each state has different rules. So I think I would start with understanding what do you want your situation to look like moving forward in terms of organizations and who the staff work for, and then understand how does your public employment retirement system relate to that desired structure. Any other questions? Okay, so what I'd like to do now, I think, is see if there's a housing authority that would like to, that's thinking about public housing and that would like to think about what their situation looks like. And I'd like to model all the stuff that we have been talking about over the last 4 sessions. Remind you where to get the tools, remind you how to use those tools and go through the thought process, and then have a brief conversation. We can't spend an enormous amount of time here, but have a brief conversation with you about what your options look like for repositioning. It looks like a hand went up. I'm not sure if that's a hand that had a question about closeout or whether that was someone who wanted to take me up on this offer.
So it looks like your audio is not connected. Carol? You'd be able to, you can send us a chat to let us know if, if you have a specific question.
Yeah, so if you want to send us a note through the chat function, let us know if you can connect, that'd be great. And if there's someone who has the ability, who has their audio set up, who's currently on mute, who would like to use their housing authority as an example, go ahead and identify yourself and we can get into it. All right, Christine, it looks like Melanie Full.
Melanie, you're unmuted.
All right, thank you. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay. We have 60 units in one building of public housing, and we also have a voucher program.
Okay.
So, and the RAD rents, or I guess the FMR, the fair market rents are higher than the RAD rents.
R is greater than rad, okay. So let's see here. I'm going to share my screen. A few things open, so forgive me. They're all related to what we're doing here, but
That's fine.
and Christina, if you could give me a reality check about the scale.
A little bit bigger. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, so what is your Housing Authority code?
MN 182.
Okay, so I've got, what I have open here is the 2018 RAD rent schedule that's available on the HUD website. So we have talked a couple of times about how to get that. You can get it on the RAD website. You can get to it through the Repositioning website. If you just Google 2018 RAD rents, it will come up. So that's what I have open here. I have a kind of a truncated version of it. I only have the Housing Authorities listed who have registered for this webinar. I just did that because the file's big. So I was trying to keep down any slowness on my computer. So you search for the Housing Authority code under the Housing Authority code information, and they're 182. Is that
182? Yep.
182. All right. So let me. All right. So let's other. So this looks like your Housing Authority.
Correct.
So here we've got the Grandview Apartments, 60 public housing units, and I'm going to scroll way over here to see that we've got 19 one-bedroom units and 19 studios, 40 ones, and then I can see what the RAD rents are for those. So I can see 406 and 547. And then I'll continue to scroll out here for the comparison. If folks recall, this is where I added some columns that just subtracted. And you can see up here, it's just a simple subtraction. You guys could do this on the file yourselves. Subtract the FMR from the RAD for that bedroom size and see what the difference is. So there's a $45 difference and a $60 difference. So you know, if we had, what, 19 of those studios, was that right?
Correct.
And what was it?
And there's actually 41 bedrooms, and they list a 3-bedroom, but we don't have that any longer.
Okay.
It was converted to office space.
So let's do this. So we know the difference is $45. So I'm curious what that dollar amount difference is for a year. So that's the monthly difference, given that I've got 19 studios and 41 ones. Now, if I multiply that by 12 months in a year, that is the difference for each bedroom. For each bedroom, for all 60 units. We're at that. And so I can see that the difference annually between my RAD revenue and my FMR revenue is about $39,000 a year. That's a big number. So that's a real difference. So that's something to consider. Now, if I have 60 units, I've got a couple of options. And now, is this one building?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to go over here real quick and just wanted to take a look at the building real quick. So what type of building is this?
It's a high-rise, 5-story.
High-rise, 5-story, okay.
Yep.
So what do you know about the condition of the building?
It's in great condition.
Okay. So it would likely not qualify for obsolescence then, is that?
No.
Okay. So, yeah. Let's figure out what that cost would be, or what that threshold is. What city are you near?
It's Morris. It's M-O-R-R-I-S. So try St. Cloud, maybe. Maybe Minneapolis is all they have in here.
It's got St. Cloud.
Okay. There we go.
So here's our TDCs, and then so remember you can download this file. And actually, since we did the Section 18 webinar, I was able to confirm that the tool with the 2019 TDCs and HCC information is available on HUD's website. So that's the tool I'm using right now.
Okay.
So I downloaded this tool, and again, you would put in under the Select City and State section, you put in your city and your state. If you're in a small city, you have to look to the nearest larger city that would be reflected in HUD's database. This then tells you the TDC and HCC threshold amounts by bedroom size, by building type. So we know, that's what this table does. We then go over to the unit mix table, and it will tell us, or give us an opportunity to put in our bedroom configuration. So if I remember, we had 19 studios and 41 ones.
Yep.
So I put it in both of these columns. I put it under rehab and new, because the rehab will give us the HCC number, and the new will give us the TDC number. The way this tool is built.
Okay.
You told me that it was a high-rise building, so it's an elevator building. The type of building we're in. So then I go to the next tab, which is TDC and HCC cost calculations, and I scroll down here, and so this tells me what the HCC amount is and the TDC amount is for that building. So for this is relevant for a couple of things. So if you're to qualify for obsolescence with an elevator building, with an elevator building, you need to show that your costs for things that need to be fixed are 62.5% of your TDC. So 62.5% of that TDC, I'm just going to do it right here. See it? That was 20,400,000 roughly.
Right.
That's 62.5%. So your obsolescence threshold is roughly $12.75 million. $1,416,000. So as you're thinking about your planning, so you know that your RAD rents are lower than your FMRs. So then you're thinking Section 18. Well, your options for Section 18 would be obsolescence. In order to meet obsolescence, you have to show that your rehab needs based upon immediate repairs necessary, because things are, again, broken, not old, but broken.
Right.
It's about $12.75 million. Now, it sounds like you were saying that your building's in pretty good shape.
It is, yeah.
So it sounds like you're not going to meet the obsolescence test.
Correct.
So what are your other options? You're not scattered sites, because you're a single building.
Right. So what about the blended thing where you know, if we RAD 10 units and do Section 18 with the other 50?
That's exactly what you would do. So that's this hybrid. So in your situation, you could submit a RAD application for all 60 units. You get a short time after you submit that application, you'll get a CHAP. Once you get a CHAP, you'll get a person who will work with you, and the name is currently evolving. Prior to the version 4 notice, they were called readiness transaction managers. So that name's going to change, but it's still going to be a helper. You're going to get a helper who will help you walk through exactly how to navigate these steps. Once you have that CHAP, you'll then start thinking about your Section 18 application for 50 units. Now, if I were you, I would put that Section 18, I would conceive of my project so that all 41 one-bedrooms were going to be part of my 50 or less, and then 9 of my studios were going to be part of my 50 or less. So it's those 50 units that would have the TPVs awarded to them, and that you would enter into a project-based voucher agreement for. And then the balance of your studio units would go RAD. By weighting your 50 or less allocation to your larger bedroom sizes, you'll increase the revenue for this building. So you'll get more revenue that way. You can then proceed simultaneously down the Section 18 and RAD track, and you'd go through the local PBV process to enter into a HAP agreement. You'd go through the RAD process, and you'd reposition this building with a hybrid between RAD and Section 18. So I think that is your best bet for your scenario, where you want to keep the building, you want to presumably keep serving the same people or that same kind of profile of people living in that building. You're not 50 or less by itself. You're not obsolete. Streamlined voluntary conversion, you know, maybe it's worth considering if you want to just pause for a second and ask yourself whether you think all of the residents would agree to let you have to turn back those vouchers. The benefit for, if they were, say for a second, 100% of your residents said, yes, I'll do that, the difference for you would be that 11 of your units that would otherwise have RAD rents would now have FMR rents. Now, there's the dollar difference is $45 a month, or $850 a year for every unit that is under RAD. So it's not a huge dollar difference for the uncertainty that would come with streamlined voluntary conversion. So there's a judgment there for you to make about your organization. If it were me, I'd think that the dollar difference isn't enough for me to want to expose myself to the streamlined voluntary conversion uncertainty, and I'd go the RAD Section 18 route.
Okay. Makes sense to me.
All right. Thank you for volunteering.
Sure.
Right. Ina, do we find my webinar browser again? Is there anyone else who would like to, who has volunteered?
On our end, we can't see until you stop sharing the desktop.
There you go.
If we have anybody else in the queue.
Hey, Mike. Mike, this is Dan. Can I just toss in a couple other advantages of the RAD Section 18 blend you were talking about? Is that the Housing Authority would then be able to wrap in some of their public housing program reserves to the project, which they wouldn't be able to do under streamlined voluntary conversion. And the RAD Section 18 blend offers all the resident protections to all those families, including the Section 8 families under the new notice. So there's a couple more benefits to doing it the way that you suggested.
Great point. Thank you. Let's see. All right, so is it Kimberly? Sarah?
Yeah. Hi. So I'm relatively new to public housing, so I really, could use your help here. So we have 55 units, scattered sites. 30 of them were built in 1958, but are in relatively good condition, or average, I should say. And the FMR is definitely higher than the RAD rents.
Okay, so let's take a look. So I'm gonna share my screen. I'm gonna again.
It looks like annually, because I was following your process there, and so when I did it, myself, we'd look at $180,000, almost $181,000 a year.
Difference, okay.
Total.
So what's your public housing number?
We have 55 units. Oh, I'm AZ008.
So what was the state abbreviation again?
AZ.
Okay. So that look like you?
Yep. The top one, yes. Just the top one.
Got it. All from getting confused. There's your 55 units, and you said they're scattered sites?
So I have, there's two different sites. They're block apart from each other, but there's two different sites.
Okay. And do the scattered sites meet the definition of scattered site?
I'm not even sure. REAC was here last week doing an inspection, and he said he would consider it scattered, but I don't know.
Okay. Let's think about that for a second. Try to find your properties. Take a look at them together. So
Hey, Mike?
yeah,
Are you still with?
Yep. Sorry for the
Okay.
silence. I am still here. So I'm looking at the addresses, or looking for the addresses for that property to get a sense of scattered site. So the definition for scattered site is that that the land upon which the building sits is not contiguous with another property, and that and that there are 4 units or less in the buildings sitting on that property. So if you have units that are that meet that definition, they could fit in the scattered site. They could be awarded under Section 18 as a scattered site.
Okay. Okay.
So that would be the first thing to look at.
Okay.
So given what you know about your property, are there any of those 55 units that are scattered sites?
Yes.
Okay, so here's, looks like your property.
Mm-hmm.
Your 55 units, so you got some that are, they're all clustered nearby.
Yep, Henderson Square, and then there's the other ones are on Gilmore and between Gilmore and Hillview.
Okay, so if some of these meet the definition of scattered site, you could use that first. So let's see which ones do, and then to the extent to which you can then decrease your remaining units to be less than 50, you can qualify for the 50 or less. So if you have 5 units that meet the scattered site definition, sorry folks, forgive my computer's not liking everything that's open right now. If you have units that meet the definition of scattered sites and can then get the remaining portfolio to be less than 50, then you could use that as your final option, which would bring with it mandatory closeout.
Okay.
And I'm going to stop this because it's bring with it mandatory closeout and would allow you the benefit of your RAD rent, pardon me, your TPB rents, which are greater than your RAD rents. And so we look out here, and there's a pretty significant difference for you between RAD rents and your FMRs. So I think if I were in your shoes, I would first do a Section 18 scattered site application for those that meet the scattered site definition, and then presuming you get yourself under 50, do a 50 or less that will bring with it a mandatory closeout. So then you got to think about all the things about closeout. So where are you going to spend what are you going to do with your DDTF and your ARF? Because you won't have a RAD project now, so you don't have this kind of a safety valve of a project to spend that money on. So you've got this hard stop with the mandatory closeout and no RAD property. So what are you going to do with that DDTF and RAD money? So projecting what that funding flow looks like coming to you and what you could do with it is going to be important.
Okay.
Do you have a housing choice voucher program?
Yes, we do.
Okay, so you don't need a buddy housing authority. You could still work with a neighboring housing authority to close out with a transition to them, and you have enough information to reasonably project what the cash value of that closeout might look like, and whether you've got any fair cloth. We could look at that as well. And then maybe they provide a service that could be helpful to you. So you could talk to them about some sort of partnership where they receive those resources and then provide something back to you. So I would do scattered site and then 50 or less. start thinking about mandatory closeout at the front end of that thought process, and think about if there's a housing authority that you might want to partner with to transition your resources to, if you find that you can't deploy all of them yourself. And there's some ways in which you can sequence things that might allow you to soak up some of that available resource, but timing is going to be really key for you to think about.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Okay, do you have anyone else?
We don't have any hands raised, but we do have a question. We have 42 units, all scattered sites, and we also have an HCV voucher program. RAD rents are 84% of FMR. We're assuming that streamlined conversion would be best for us. What would be the best option for us going forward? Assuming the tenants would move elsewhere after properties are sold, so they would need some kind of tenant-based vouchers at the end.
Let's see. So tell me again how many units they have?
2.
How many?
42.
42 public housing units. And the information says they're scattered sites?
Yes, all of them are scattered sites, it says.
And is this a participant who looks like do they have audio or don't have audio?
We're about to check. Can you test out your line?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Did you have questions regarding what we wrote?
Yeah, so it sounds like you have 42 public housing units.
Correct.
And you have a housing choice voucher program.
Correct.
And your RAD rents are at 82% of your FMRs.
84, but yeah.
84, pardon me. Okay. And did you check to see what the dollar difference was? Is that
I don't have it on hand.
Okay. What's your
Davenport, Iowa.
What's your PHA code?
IA 045.
So I might not have had you in my original registration list because I didn't get you added to my list here. But so we can do this without the numbers. So if your RAD rents are greater, pardon me, your FMRs are greater than your RAD rents, so it leads me to think that a Section 18 disposition would be preferable. With 42 units, you would qualify for the 50 or less. So that's the first thing I would think about. So you wouldn't have to figure out if they're scattered or not. They're 42 being less than 50, you qualify for the 50 or less. So you could do a 50 or less Section 18 application, which comes with it mandatory closeout. You could apply for tenant protection vouchers for all the units that have been occupied in the last 24 months prior to your dispo approval letter. And then you could either project base those vouchers back in the units if your plan is to keep those buildings, or you could provide those vouchers to residents and sell those buildings. If you're going to sell the buildings, then, so again, so this is Section 18, so a disposition is mandatory. So you have to have a new entity that the buildings are going to go to. If your plan is to keep them in your portfolio, you still want to own them and run them and use them as a housing resource, then you'd create an entity to transition them to. If your plan is to sell them, presumably at fair market value or get the most for them, you would sell them and then tell HUD in your Section 18 application what you think the fair market value is, and then HUD would enter into a regulatory agreement or a control agreement with you for the use of funds or the fund proceeds, which you can then use for future activities. So of those two options, what is it you want? What do you want your future state to be for these 42 units? Do you want to keep owning them and running them, or do you want to sell them?
That's currently up in the air. Our council has to discuss all of this, so we're just trying to get the information to provide to them at this time.
So if your strategy is to preserve these units and keep them as an affordable resource in your community, which you control, you can do that through the less than 50 Section 18 disposition. And you would create a new entity that could be, again, a limited partnership or a nonprofit. You would transfer title of the real estate to that entity, presumably for no cost. You would then receive tenant protection vouchers and be able to project-based stack those vouchers in those units and continue to run them as affordable rental housing. But the operations would benefit from a revenue which is about 16% greater than what your, well, probably more than that, given what your ad rents are. So your revenue would be greater than your current revenue and would provide you with some certainty. So you'd have more reliable revenue. You'd have the ability to spend some of your resources, the cash flow coming from that property back on the buildings for capital needs, and then you do mandatory closeout, so you no longer have a Section 9 program. So that's the strategy for preservation. If your strategy is to let the residents opt out and you no longer own real estate, you start down the same path, Section 18, 50 or less. Once it's approved, you get tenant protection vouchers. You then use those vouchers to assist the households in moving. So here you have to follow the relocation rules under 24 CFR 971, which means that you have to provide reasonable relocation support, help them you have to offer a comparable unit. So you help those residents successfully move somewhere else. Once they've moved somewhere else, you can then sell the homes. So if I'm going to make this up, I'm guessing that they're all like small buildings, so maybe houses or doubles. So you'd sell those to one or multiple buyers and then use those proceeds in a way that is consistent with what your dispo plan said to the SAC and consistent with the agreement with HUD for the use of dispo proceeds. So those are your two tracks. Track one being, I want to still be a landlord and own and offer this housing to low-income people. Track two is, I want to help these folks transition into different housing, still being affordable to them because they'll have a voucher and we're no longer a landlord.
So you said either way they get tenant protection voucher?
Well, under either scenario, the Housing Authority would be awarded a tenant protection voucher for any unit occupied within the prior 24 months from the date of your dispo approval letter.
Okay.
So the big choice for you guys at a policy level is, do you still want to be a landlord and provide the certainty of those units being affordable to low-income people, or do you want to support folks through the voucher? If for some reason you're thinking that you don't want to be a landlord, but you value the certainty of this operating subsidy being tied to a unit, so the community knows that that unit is going to be affordable, but you guys decide that you're just not cut out to be landlords for whatever the reason. And I'm not judging, it's just you're not set up that way. But maybe there's a partner in town that is. So maybe you find a nonprofit partner who is well suited to be the landlord, who you could do a less than fair market value disposition to that entity, who is set up and totally equipped to be the landlord of these units. You could then project base those new tenant protection vouchers in those units, which that partner of yours will now own. They run them. So you guys would have no longer have the responsibility of the landlord, and you would know that you've created the long-term certainty of affordable housing in those 42 units going forward.
Okay, and then I guess another part of this, if they've had to move and we give them those tenant protection voucher, it's set up for our Housing Choice Voucher Program that's 2 heartbeats per room, and then our public housing is based on sex and age. So would they have to follow our HCV program rules?
So your local project-based voucher program would fit within your overall HCV program. So whatever rules you guys have for running your HCV program that relate to occupancy and rent increases and all that stuff would extend to your project-based voucher program as you've defined it in your admin plan.
Okay.
That help?
Yep, thank you.
You're welcome. Do we have anyone else who's interested in exploring options?
We don't have anything else on our end.
Okay. So maybe at this time we'll see if folks have general questions about rules. So we don't need to do a on-the-fly case study, but we could just see if folks have any questions about anything that we've gone over. I know we've got a couple of HUD experts on the call who could help field questions if there are any about anything that we talked about over the last 4 sessions. So RAD, Section 18, streamlined voluntary conversion, project-basing vouchers, closeout. That noise tells me there's a question. Is that a question? Oh, the hand just went down. Not seeing any more questions. One last call for questions. All right. Well, that is the end of the prepared presentations, and that's the end of this 4-part series. Thank you for spending the time, and I'd like to acknowledge everyone at HUD who had a hand in this. Dan Esterling, Greg Byrne, Kathy Zybis, Eric Chambers, Chad Ruppel, Jane Hornstein from the SAC. I'm sure I'm forgetting some. Ava, our project-based voucher expert, and others. So thank you all for helping me make sure I've got all this dialed in and spending all the time on the slides and preparing this presentation. And thanks to all the participants for spending the time. All this information is going to be available on the websites, so you can relive this if you choose, or share it with family and friends. And hopefully you'll find it useful as you work on strategies for your own portfolio. With that, I don't have anything else. Christina, if you want to, is there anything else? Oh, one more thing, actually, the survey. So folks should get a survey when they log off. If you have constructive thoughts that you want to offer, please do. Anything we can do, anything I can do, anything HUD can do to improve our delivery would be appreciated. So any thoughts you have about how we could do that would be appreciated. Thank you in advance for the survey response.
Hey, this is Dan from HUD. I just wanted to jump in and echo Mike's sentiment. First, thanks, Mike, for doing such a great job these past 4 sessions. And also, we at HUD, we really do, we want to help housing authorities. So just, please take seriously Mike's request to fill out the survey. Anything that we can do to improve this or anything that you liked in particular or thought could be improved, please do let us know in the survey.
All right, one last call for questions. Last chance. All right. Well, is that Michael O'Neill, is that a question? I see a hand raised down there. I think that might have been, was that a prior question, or Michael, do you have a question?
We unmuted you, Michael.
All right, maybe that was another inadvertent hand raise. That happens from time to time on the webinars. Thank you all, and I think that concludes our webinar. And thank you for your time.